Don't you just love the music ministry of this church? Every week it's different. Every week it is great. I have a rather eclectic taste in music anyway, so I like most all of it. Melissa calls my taste in music erratic, not eclectic. But my random playlist might go from KC and the Sunshine Band to Willie Nelson doing Troublemaker, followed by Lil Wayne and Bow Wow on the Hardball soundtrack. I'm all over the place. But it might be because I don't understand music. I don't have a really refined palate for what these folks do so incredibly well every week. I do love language. I love lyrics. Raven hair and ruby lips and sparks fly from her fingertips. That's good writing. I mean, put it to any tune, that's good writing. Holes in my confidence, holes in the knees of my jeans. I was left without a penny in my pocket. 2 sentences. Paul Simon is a genius. One of my favorite lines is a little more current than that, 2013, the John Legend song, All of Me. I will say and not sing the chorus. You will thank me for saying and not singing the chorus. 'Cause all of me loves all of you. Love your curves and all your edges, all your perfect imperfections. Give your all to me, I'll give my all to you. You're my end and my beginning. Even when I lose, I'm winning. That is swooning love stuff right there. But my favorite line in this ballad by John Legend is love all your perfect imperfections. Wouldn't you love to think somebody found your imperfections just to be perfect? But I spend most of my energy trying to impress you with the lie that I have no imperfections. I'd rather you think I lead a postcard life of sunshine and brunch and great literature and travel, and the energy we spend trying to show each other how perfectly we live when we know it's a lie. We show each other the tan, the relaxed, the coiffed, the image that we wish our life to be. Facebook posts of beach sunrise and a night at the Fox Theater and laughing children. Who in their right mind would lead with imperfection? I don't ever see any of you posting early morning with a headache and no makeup and a bathrobe. I don't ever see that. We all want to show the lie that we've got it together. But what makes the John Legend song so powerful is that what we most want is for somebody to love us enough to know the ways we are imperfect and to think our brokenness is a part of what makes us beautiful. We spend so much time trying to lead with how perfect we are, yet what we really crave is the blessing of somebody seeing our imperfection and declaring us as loved. God does that. It is God kind of love, and every Sunday ought to be a celebration of that grace. But it's hard to lead with your imperfection, especially in a community of people who all have straight teeth and easy answers. The Apostle Paul shared this ego battle with us, by the way. So, somewhere around AD 50, the apostle planted a church in Corinth. Once he was satisfied that that church was on its feet, he moved on to plant another church in Ephesus. But he and the leaders of the church at Corinth would keep in touch through correspondence. And in a series of letters, Paul learned that after he had left Corinth, a new group of Christian evangelists moved to town, and they started challenging Paul's authority. They were positioning themselves as the real leaders in the church. Besides, they said, Paul is crude and insecure and tactless. He can be volatile. Not to mention, have you seen the guy? He's short, he's weak. In his letters back to the church, Paul came to call these guys the super apostles. I think he was poking back a little bit. But Paul, in his earthy and gritty way, didn't talk much about the heavenly realm. He didn't use much of that up above language. He didn't have a lot to say about the saints and the angels, but the super apostles did. They came into town with their hair blown dry, bragging about their credentials in the heavenly realm. And they required a little money from the church because they were good spiritual leaders and they thought the church ought to help them out a little. They were a success. Everybody loves a winner. And one of the ways they established their bona fides is that they belittled the church's founding pastor. Paul, he's short and weak and tactless and insecure. Look at us. We're never insecure. We're strong and clear. We have answers and smooth skin. You want to follow us. You want to be associated with success, don't you? Well, the truth is, Paul took the bait. First, he started going toe-to-toe with the super apostles. He started proving his credentials from above. He backed off on completely bragging. He used that old ruse, I know a guy, I've got a friend, right? He was really talking about himself, but he said, I know a person. I know a person in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up in the third heaven. Not sure if it was in the body or out of the body. See, he was kind of going toe-to-toe with them for a while. But finally, he realized that posting the perfect Facebook post was not being totally honest. He was short and weak and insecure and sometimes volatile. Not to mention, he also has a thorn in his flesh. He is not a touched-up magazine ad. The truth is, he's a broken mess. He's been in and out of prison. He's been chained and beaten more than once. He's got this thorn in the flesh. For all of his accomplishment, Paul is a broken, imperfect mess. So he stops that back and forth, that adolescent argument with the super apostles. He stops saying, oh, well, guess what? I know a guy went to the third heaven, so huh. He stops all that, and instead he says, you know, the only thing I really have to brag about is my weakness. He gave up the exhausting game of trying to one-up the super apostles and just said, you know, they're right. I am weak and broken and imperfect. This is who I am. And right here, Paul enters into the great stream of the kingdom of God. He enters into the center of the teaching of Jesus because admitting his weakness, he has identified with the great Jesus theme, and this is how Pastor James C. Howell puts it. Perfection in weakness is Jesus' entire story. God manifested his immense power not by rumbling down from heaven with a horde of chariots, but as a tender, totally vulnerable infant, unable to walk or talk or do anything except simply be held by his mother. He became a laughingstock, rode a mere donkey instead of a stallion, was shackled and beaten, an incredible show of weakness, and he didn't even argue with Pilate. Spoke astonishing words of forgiveness over the very soldiers who just nailed his frail body to a shaft of olive wood. But that moment was the perfect display of the heart of God, the ultimate embodiment of the truth about the universe. Grace sufficient. And that was the Apostle Paul's declaration too. When Paul declared and complained about his imperfect self, when he complained to God, the Lord said to him, "My grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness." I know this sounds upside down. I know it does. Power made perfect in weakness. But the gospel is full of teaching that sounds upside down. It just happens to be the way to life abundant. I know it's upside down for Paul to say, the only thing I really have to brag about is how weak I am. But it is true that when we lead with our vulnerability, there is room created for the power of God's sufficiency to enliven and invigorate all of the broken places. I think it was Seward Hiltner. I'm not sure where I read this. I think I read it in a book by Seward Hiltner. He was a great pastoral care and counseling writer of the 1950s. But the image that I think was his was he talked about the magical thing that happens in the Christian experience when three stories intersect. When I tell you my story, and you find that place where your story intersects that one, and you tell me your story, and somewhere we find it located in the biblical story, something about that vulnerability transforms us. But we've got to find the grace to try to stop competing with the super apostles and just admit to God and to each other that we are broken and imperfect. And when we do, some powerful force of God's grace arrives, and power is made perfect in weakness. There are people in our own community, they're sitting in here now, who are much, much more powerful than you realize. They're not super apostles. They don't get their name in the paper. They are broken people who pray every day for God's power to show up in their imperfection. Some people find the grace to stop going toe-to-toe with the super apostles. Some people risk community, real community, by boasting only of their weakness, being vulnerable enough to stop the silly game and admit to each other and God that we are imperfect and trust God's grace to make power perfect in our weakness. When we're honest about our weakness, when we give up our struggles to manage our own life and to block God with our amazing egos, God is present with power that seeps into the broken places and heals them with grace. Power in weakness could have been the name of the documentary film about Mr. Rogers. Have y'all seen this yet? Melissa and I just went to see it yesterday. There is a new film out at the theaters, a documentary about Mr. Rogers, of all people. It was terrific. There are two connections with the city of Atlanta in that film. One is George Worth is one of the people interviewed. You all know Dr. Worth. He's been a guest in this pulpit. He's the retired pastor of First Presbyterian Church here in Atlanta, and he and Fred Rogers were friends. He's one of the people on camera. Another one of the people on camera is Tom Junod, who is a journalist. And for a while, he was at the Atlanta magazine, but he spent most of his career with Esquire magazine and also struck up a friendship with Fred Rogers. Well, several years ago in Esquire magazine, he told this story about Mr. Rogers that didn't show up in the movie at all. But he told a story about a boy with an acute case of cerebral palsy. He was treated badly as a young child, had some real trauma when he was young. He was moved to live with another family. And his new mother noticed that when he watched Mr. Rogers, he just transformed. He just loved watching Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, even though he was 14 years old. But he had so much self-hatred that he would harm himself. He would hit himself. But never when he was watching Mr. Rogers. She thought he was keeping her son alive. Well, at some point, a benevolent foundation found out about this boy's love of Mr. Rogers, that Fred Rogers was coming to California for something else. They made arrangements for him to go by and meet this boy who's in a wheelchair. When he arrived, the boy got nervous, got into one of his fits. They had to take him out of the room. He started that uncontrollable stuff that he did. But when the boy finally calmed down, they brought him back. And Fred Rogers patiently waited the whole time till he got calm and got back. When he got back in, Fred Rogers asked for a favor. I would like you to do something for me. Would you do something for me? On his computer, the boy typed out and answered yes. Mr. Rogers said, I would like for you to pray for me. Will you pray for me? Well, the boy was thunderstruck. Nobody ever asked him for anything. And he knew he had been the object of other people's prayers, but nobody had ever asked him to pray. He agreed to pray for Mr. Rogers. And the boy found a new reason to live. Well, when Fred Rogers told Tom Junod, the journalist, this story, the journalist complimented him for being so smart. He said, what a smart thing to do, to ask this boy to pray for you so that this boy would feel better about himself. Mr. Rogers responded with surprise. He said, oh, heavens no, Tom. I didn't ask him for prayers for him. I asked for me. I ask him because I think that anyone who's gone through challenges like that must be very close to God. It's upside down, I know. But the power of God is made perfect in our weakness, if only we would risk. Amen.